Well, hello everyone and welcome back to the channel and to part 2 of the Honda 400 Dream CB400T service and repair of the oil weep from the clutch cover where the clutch actuating lever goes into the case. There was a weep from here and we need to fix that. So I've got all the parts that I need now. If we come over to the bench, we've got an oil filter. So we basically, because I've had to drain the oil, I might as well do a service on the bike at the same time. So we've got an oil filter, we've got a new air filter, spark plugs, we've got a new gasket for the clutch cover, and we've got some fresh oil, the most important thing, cup of tea, and I've splashed out and I've bought myself a tappet adjustment tool. So these are copies of the original Honda tool, I understand, and it's in 2 parts. So basically what you've got is an inner part with what effectively is an end on it that will fit into the top of the adjuster, and then you've got this part which effectively is a spanner, a hollow spanner, which fits over the lock nut, and when those 2 parts slide together, that gives me the ability to hold the lock nut still while I'm turning the tappet, hopefully with one hand and the feeler gauges in the other hand, which should make life much easier than trying to hold a spanner, a separate screwdriver, and then the feeler gauges. I've just got fed up fiddling around with it, and these weren't very expensive. I'm happy to spot them on Honda Classics, and I thought I'd buy one of those. So without further ado, let's get started, and the first thing to do is to clean up the gasket faces on the clutch cover and the crankcase. And of course the other thing I've got is the all-important O-ring to replace the one where that was causing the problem with the oil weep in the first place. Job number 1, as always, clean the gasket faces properly. We don't want to end up with a leak caused by poor preparation of the gasket surfaces. So we cure one leak and then create another. So this one, well, I don't know whether it was put on with this, but this looks like it's oil running down, but actually it's not. This is solid, basically. I say it's solid, it's sort of sticky. I think this might be what they call well seal. I've got some of that somewhere. So this stuff called well seal, which is a jointing compound, is quite an old product these days, made in England by a company called Stag, and I much prefer this to silicone, generally speaking, and particularly when there are no gaskets and you just use this stuff instead. The advantage of this is it doesn't set. It goes, as it says, it's non-hardening, and you can use it with gaskets. And the advantage of it is that it doesn't push the gaskets out of place like silicone would. It stays flexible, and normally it means that it's easy to peel off a gasket and reuse it. Obviously we can't reuse this one, and I think they've gone slightly over the top of the amount they've used on here. But we've got our trusty scraper with what effectively is a Stanley blade or a razor blade in there, nice and sharp. And we're just going to keep this flat. We're not going to dig in like this. We don't want to take chunks out of the aluminium. We're just going to keep this nice and flat and see if we can get all of this off. There is a dowel in there, but it's stuck in, so I'm going to leave that and we'll see how we go. So let's make a start, see how we go with this. pretty sure this is Welsa, although in the past it's clearly had some kind of silicone used on this as well. So, you know, this bike is over 40 years old, so I'm sure this has been on a few times in its life, and I'm sure different people have used different methods of holding the gasket in place, or different ways of trying to seal it. We might, depending on the condition of this, we might just try and put this one back on with a new gasket and no kind of gunge on it whatsoever, well seal or anything else, because according to the manual it shouldn't need it. Certainly wasn't assembled with anything on at the factory. It was just literally the dry gasket. This is all coming off quite nicely so far, famous last words, but hopefully if we carry on doing this, all this will come off and we'll have a nice clean surface to work with. So next up are the components that go together to make up the clutch actuation lever, which is the shaft itself and the connector for the cable, the clutch cable. We've got the O-ring, which was causing the problem in the first place, or replacement for the O-ring that was causing the problem, which goes into that groove there. That provides the seal between the case and this, enabling the oil to stay in the case and not leak out, not seep out here, which it was doing before. Then we've got our circlip, which goes right at the bottom in a groove to hold the whole thing in place. There's a spring that goes on here, and then we've got the actual actuator itself operated by the cutout in this shaft here. So first thing we need to do is to put the O-ring onto here. So I'm going to grab some grease, high temperature grease, which I'm going to put deliberately around there where the O-ring sits. Just to help it along, don't want to damage it. Put it on, and then we'll slide the O-ring onto the shaft, and then gently ease that over the lip into place, like so. And then we're also going to put a liberal amount of grease around that, so that when we slide it into the case, it doesn't damage the O-ring, and it helps to provide the seal that's required to stop the oil coming out. Okay, no reason why we shouldn't put any on the shaft as well, the actuator. So inside the case itself, I don't know if you can see these, but where the shaft goes through, you can see a needle roller bearing in there, and there is another one down in there as well for the other end of the shaft to go through. So that's what our shaft's going to be going through, sealed by that O-ring, and then a spring and the actuator on the end. So first thing to do is to, this case by the way has been through the parts cleaner, so it's all been cleaned out after the gasket's come off, or I've taken the gasket off. So next job is to push this with the O-ring through and down into, yeah, it went in with a nice click, so hopefully that will now provide a nice seal there. And then just to show you how this works when it's all assembled, this plunger sits down in there, and then as the lever is turned, you can see that moving in and out, which operates our clutch. Okay, but this at the moment is just loose, it's not coming back, so we need to put the spring on. So we take the plunger back out for now, and then the spring has an end, two different ends on it, one there and one like that. This one hooks over a part of the case. This one sits in the end of the shaft. In the end of the shaft is a groove, and it sits in there. So we've got to get this orientation right so that it provides pressure, or a return I should say, in the right areas. I think the way to do this, if I remember rightly, is we swing this lever all the way round, the opposite to where it would normally be, and then put the spring in place like so, so that when we move the lever back round, the spring sits against that part of the case, held in place, and then yeah, the lever is now spring loaded, and the final, not the final part, but the next part is just to drop this actuator back in place. So it's got a bit of roughness on that, let's just clean that up with a cloth. And then some grease on that, and drop that back into place. Turn the lever, and that'll just drop back in place and hold that in place now. Okay, so final part of this assembly is to put our circlip back on. You can't see it, but there's a groove in the end of this shaft, and we're just going to put our circlip back on to hold all that in place. So that's our gasket in place. Roughly, it's, as is often the case, not the best fitting gasket. Holes don't quite line up and it sort of bows out near the top here. But hopefully they'll resolve itself when we put the cover on. I've checked things like the clutch bearings, various of the bits and pieces in here, gears, etc. Everything looks absolutely fine for a, you know, what effectively is a 40-year-old bike, 40-plus-year-old bike. Normally at this point, before I start doing any of this, I'd have probably cleaned a lot of this up, maybe polish the cases, that type of thing. But this bike is basically my daily rider, let's call it that. I don't ride daily, I only ride for pleasure these days. But if I had arranged to go to a bike meet maybe, or an event that required me going on a vintage Japanese motorbike, and it was wet or raining, then I would take this as opposed to something like the CBX or the SRX, which I've had nut and bolt restorations, and frankly I just don't want to get them wet. I know not everyone agrees with that, but when you spend that much time and effort on them, you know, I don't want to get them to a stage where I just can't get into certain areas to clean them properly. Now they've had a nut and bolt restoration, so unless they get caught out, they don't go. Those sorts of bikes don't go out in the wet. But this one, which hasn't had a restoration at all, really, it's just had bits and pieces done to it as I'm going along. I'm happy to. Well, I'm not happy to go out in the wet, but I'm happier to go out in the wet on this one, so at least I don't miss out on the event or whatever I'd planned on going to. Right. Sorry, I'm rambling on. Let me fetch the. I've just checked. We did the tensioner up properly as well. If you haven't seen part one of this, go look at that. That shows you how this tensioner works for the balance chain. Don't think it's ever been touched, but you can see that in the last video. That's all now sorted. I've just checked that. Don't forget, this bike engine is the same as a CB400N or 250N. So if you've got a Super Dream, basically everything I'm doing on this, you can do on those. Right, so our clutch cover is back together, surface is all cleaned. I've degreased everything with brake cleaner, blown everything out with the airline, make sure there's no bits and pieces lying around in there. We've got a kickstart seal here, which wasn't leaking, seems to be fine. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to put a drop of grease on that shaft there before we go any further, just so that slides on nice and easily. Doesn't damage that. Shouldn't do anyway, but better be safe than sorry. There's no point fixing one leak and then creating another. So just another check on this gasket, which is sort of sliding out of place as I move it around, but hopefully we'll be able to get our screws through. I think the bottom ones need to go first, looking at that. Let's put this back on to see how we go. Okay, so this should just slide back on. There shouldn't be any kind of requirement to force this into place, apart from a gentle nudge here and there. Make sure our locating dowels are on in place, and then there shouldn't be any need to force that other than what I've literally just done there, and that should be it. Okay, so let's get some screws in there. Now I don't know if you remember, but there was one screw which came out of here which was the wrong screw. It's still the wrong screw, the right one hasn't turned up, it's far too short, but it's what we've got at the minute. It's not going to stop us putting it back together, and I'll worry about that one when the other screws arrive. So that one can go in there. I'm just going to do them all up loosely first, then we're going to do them up in a diagonal pattern as per the manual first of all. So we're just going to put I've actually bought some aluminium based anti-seize now. Rather than the copper slit, this stuff is better for mixed metals and where heat's involved. So I'm going to use this, particularly as we're using standard JS screws in this rather than hex bolts. I want to make sure that all of these are going to go in and out without too much hassle. So I am going to put some aluminium grease on these as we're going in and out. We're putting it all back together. Okay, I'll crack on getting these screws in and then we'll come back in a minute. Right, okay, we'll go with that. We'll see how we get on. Let's check around there just to make sure it looks like we've got the gasket all lined up properly, which it's a bit late now, but I think looks like we have. All seems to be in. I don't like these green gaskets that you can see sticking out from cases like this. I suppose it proves you've just changed the gasket, but I'd rather it was black like the originals, and slightly better fitting than that, but there you go. It is what it is. Let's move on to the next step. Job is to fit the drain plug back in with its new washer. I can't find a torque wrench setting for this in either the Haynes manual or the official workshop manual. So it's a 17-inch bolt and it's going into steel bolt going into aluminium. So usual sort of thing applies. Don't go stupid with it. Just do it reasonable. Feels okay. Thing to do is just give that a bit of a clean up with some brake cleaner around there, and then once the engine's been running for a little bit, check it, and if we've got any weeps or anything around there, because we've cleaned it before we fired the engine up, we'll know that any new oil there is going to be from after we've refilled it, and then we'll know that we need to just torque that up a little bit more and perhaps inspect the washer. Okay, so that's got all the oil off that. Okay, I've run the oil filter housing and components through the parts washer. This was particularly covered in old oil and crud and grease, and I just want to get everything off that. So when we put it back together, we know we're not getting any contaminants in the oil. So basically what this consists of is this housing, which is, as you can see, is shaped so that we can't get it on the wrong way around, and also this protrusion here. There's a protrusion on the crankcase which sits in there, so again it's really foolproof. We can't get that the wrong way around. The gasket appears to be in sound condition. It's nice and pliable. There's no cracks or tears in it, rips or anything I can see anywhere, so we're going to reuse that. We will put some grease on that as we reassemble, so we'll just put a bit of grease generally on around there, and then we'll drop that back into the groove like so. It goes in like that, fits as it should, so that's that. And then we've got our bolt with the oil holes in, a spring, a washer. Now you need to make sure that you take this washer off of the old filter, because quite often when you take this whole assembly off the bike, that washer is going to be stuck to your filter, not left on here like it should be. So you often find that these have been put back on and this washer is missing because people didn't realize it was still stuck on the old filter. So look for that, put that back on, and then we've got our new filter. Now I don't know if it's just missing in this box, but I can show you on here if I take these bits off. There is an O-ring on here, a sealing O-ring, and I was expecting a new one of those in the box with the oil filter, but for whatever reason, I don't know whether High Flow just don't provide them or whether it's just missing out of this particular box, I'm not sure. But the O-ring looks absolutely fine. It wasn't leaking before, so we're going to reuse that. Again, we'll just put a smear of grease around there, just a light smear of grease. So take the spring and the washer off the bolt. The bolt then pushes through the casing and clicks in place like that, and that's the sound of the the O-ring going in place. That's nice and tight as it should be. Then you can go back on with your spring, doesn't matter which way round, then your washer, and then your new filter. this has got writing on it. It doesn't say up or down. It's just got the number of the filter on HF111 in this case. I tend to put the writing at the top just so that when I take it off next time, I know I've got the right filter going back on. These are quite tight to push on. Okay, and obviously this is now sprung loaded. There we go. That's it. And now that's time to get that back on the bike. So as you can see, it's not the cleanest of bikes underneath there, but we do need to make sure that the face of this housing is free of any kind of contamination. So I'm just going to wipe that round like so. Get that nice and clean. And then that little protrusion there fits around the slot that was on the body of the oil filter, and of course because it's shaped like this anyway, you can't really get this the wrong way around. Okay, so let's offer this up and see if we can get this in. Hopefully it won't be too much in your way. That's right there, I think. Yeah. We're just filling at the back to make sure that the protrusion goes into the slot on this, so that locks it in place. Right, I'm sure some of you will have spotted my deliberate mistake. The clutch cable bracket is held in place by two of the screws that hold the casing on, so I should have done that at the same time. So we're going to have to pop those out and just put that back on. So let me just put some light on the subject so you can see what's going on. Hopefully that makes things a bit better. Right, so that screw and that screw have got to come back out basically. Well, you live and learn. You live and learn. I make these mistakes, so you don't have to. I think what we need to do is which side of the exhaust does that go? Must be that side. Oh, no, Mum. It'll be that side, won't it? I think. Yeah, must be that side. Okay, so I think we need to get this back onto the actuator first, though, because I think once that's on, we won't be able to pull that far enough to do that. And that's how we took it off. So we're just doing a reverse of what we did before. So if I slide that round, hopefully you can see there's a slot in the end of that. So we just pull back the gaiter, drop that into there like so, and then we can just drop those screws back in there now. Step forward, 2 steps back, as they say. Get those back done up. Done back up, I should say. Hopefully you can see a bit more than just my hand doing up screws. Okay. There we go. That's that back in place. I don't really like the fact that cable sort of sits so close to that exhaust. Yeah, it's in the clamp at the top, it's down there at the bottom, so there must be some sort of heat protection on there. But, right, we might need to adjust that clutch because let's give the pull lever a bit of a pull. That's working. Doesn't really seem to be very much free play in that at all, but I didn't actually adjust any of these adjusters, so I'm just going to, I'll leave it like that and we'll see how it goes when we're back on the road. Okay, next thing to go on, or go back, is the tacho drive, which is just a push fit into there and a screw which goes in and sits against that recess to hold it in place. Doesn't seem to be any kind of washer or grommet or O-ring in there at all. There wasn't one when I took it out. Doesn't seem to be one of the, according to the parts manual. So we'll just go with that. I'm going to put some grease in there though, just to help that along its way, like so, and that pushes in. Presumably it will find it sewn. Just need to turn that till, there we go, that's popped all the way in. Aluminium anti-seize grease on the bolt that goes into there, and that is a 10mm. To do that up. Done. And that leaves us with the heat shield to go onto the exhaust and the kickstart. So I think we'll go with the heat shield next. It's pretty beat up, to be honest, this heat shield. So obviously had some knocks and bangs over the years, but so I'm not too precious about this bike because this is my, if it seems to have daily riding, this would be my daily riding. Given in now. Going in properly. There we go, that's better. Yeah, this brake lever and the foot peg all look slightly bent to me. It doesn't really affect me when I'm riding it, but it does seem a little, when you look at it, it looks a little off. It's not banging on anything at the moment, so I'm just going to leave it, but at some point I just need to have a look at perhaps bending this back. I think this has been bent out. I think what's happened is it's fell over, or there's definitely some marks along here, rash marks along here. It's been down on the ground at speed, I would say. So I think this has probably got bent right in. When they've bent it out, I think they've actually bent it too far, or they've had to bend it out that far to stop it hitting the exhaust. So the whole thing, it needs clamping there, and then this bit needs bending back. But I don't know whether to heat it up and do it or try it. I need to look closer at what it's made of and see whether it needs heat or not to do it. Same with the foot peg. But that's for another day. It seems fine as it is at the moment. Right, so that leaves us with two components to put back on this side: the kickstart and the footrest. And the old aluminium grease around that. Kickstart itself looks in good condition, splines are in good condition. So I'm going to go with this. Go there, can't go there. So that's that first position, I think that makes sense. There we go. I mean, I get it, you know, but at the same time, why use most bolts tend to be 12 or 14 on these things, and occasionally you go 13. If you know, let me know in the comments. I'm sure there's a good reason for it somewhere down the line. Okay, feels fine to me. There's only one bolt holds this on, and then this flat here Stops it from swivelling by holding it against the hanger there. So go with that. I think I've been doing it all this time that I'll be able to, there, 17. I thought that was a different size, but it is a 17. Right, let's get that done up. And it's got a bit of movement in it, so you can adjust it, I suppose. But I suppose really it's just meant to sit against that flat like that, really. So we'll go with that. See what happens as we do it up. Yeah, that's fine as it is. Do that up nice and tight. That's going into the aluminium, so just be a little bit careful. Yeah, that's nice and tight. It's not going anywhere. Happy days. So we're now, should be oil tight. All the case bolts are done up. New filters on. Drain plugs in and done up. Tacho drives back in. Footrest on. Kickstart on. Clutch reconnected up. So that's basically everything we took off. So next is filling up with oil. And then we're going to start on the other service components such as spark plugs, tappets, carb synchronization.